Hi there. Today I'm going to review this book, The Best Years of the Beatles by Pete Best with Bill Harry. Now, Pete Best was born in India, and him and his brother Rory, they moved with the family over to England and settled in West Derby, which is this area I live in. And Johnny, the father, was a boxing promoter involved in the Liverpool Stadium, and his mother, Mo, decided to open a coffee bar. They were living in a big house in Hayman's Green, and they turned the basement into a coffee bar / club, which was called the Casbah. And one of the main bands there was the Quarrymen, until they fell out over money with Mo. But Pete got to know them fairly well, and he became interested in the drums and joined a group, or formed a group called the Blackjacks, and they played at the Casbah. And then he got a call from Paul. They needed a drummer to go to Germany with them. At this time, the Beatles had loads of different drummers, but the rest of the Beatles were all kind of footloose and fancy free as regards work, whereas the drummers all seemed to have steady jobs, so they couldn't commit to a season in Hamburg. And they were desperately looking for someone, and they eventually settled on Pete. And he went along to the Jacaranda Club, which was the club in Slater Street that Alan Williams owned, and played a few numbers. Alan Williams came in, and the Beatles said, "This is Pete, he's the drummer." The contract with Hamburg specified they had to have a drummer. So they go off to Hamburg, and in the book he talks about the journey out there. It's quite detailed, and they eventually arrive the Reeperbahn, into the Große Freiheit, and into the Kaiserkeller, and which is a really decent club. So they were made up in the phrases of the day. This is it. But then they were taken further down the Freiheit into the dark end where the neon finished, and there was a little club called the Indra, and that's where they were going to be playing, and they were quite disheartened at this, and then even more disheartened when they were given their accommodation in the Bambikino. So nevertheless, they start at the Indra. One of the points that Pete makes in the book is this myth that Stu was a terrible bass player. He said he wasn't terrible. He wasn't as good as Paul became, but he was certainly adequate, at the very least, for what they were doing. And he said he worked hard at it. And this myth that he used to stand with his back to the audience so they couldn't see that he couldn't play or wasn't playing the bass, he said that's it, it's just a myth. He used to turn his body quite a lot when he was playing, and he held the bass very, very high, as John did with his guitar, and a lot of the bands copied the way they held the guitars at the time. So they're playing at the Indra, and then there's noise complaints, so they move to the Kaiserkeller, and they start doing rotations with Derry and the Seniors, who were the band that had preceded them out into Hamburg. And then Derry left, and Rory Storm and the Hurricanes came over. They actually took top billing at the Kaiserkeller. There's a famous poster, and this was some sort of ploy to try and get more people in. At the time, back in Liverpool, Rory's Storm and the Hurricanes were more popular than the Beatles had been. Beatles hadn't really been that well known in Liverpool, and but by this time in Hamburg, they'd really tightened up their act. You know, just by the fact they were playing so much, and there was a rivalry between the two bands. And according to Pete, at the end of the day, the Beatles did come out on top just by sheer professionalism and musicality. Then lots of incidents in Hamburg. He describes how they used to go to Harold's and decompress there. They would play fight on the Reaper Barn, pretending to fight each other and stop the traffic. Young guys messing about. So, you know, they weren't living or they were living in terrible conditions. They were playing very long hours, much longer hours than anyone was doing back in Liverpool or did since, really, anywhere. And but they were doing what they loved, and they were having a really great time, and lots and lots of girlfriends. So they come back, and there's an incident, obviously, which is really well known as to why they had to leave Hamburg. It's all in the book. They come back and they get together again and play, firstly at the Casbah. Stuart has stayed in Hamburg with Astrid. By the way, that's all comes into, had been already discussed in the book. The Astrid and Jürgen and Klaus, the Exes, and the famous photo sessions, talks about that, and those pictures are in the book. Lots of great photos. Bill Harry's photo library is extensive, and I'll just show you a couple of the pictures that are in the book. Some of the old pictures from Merseybeat, different groups, and then the Casbah and Quarrymen playing at the Casbah. Quite a historic photo. And the Jacaranda, Alan Williams, the Jacaranda, and that small picture is the, if we can see it, is the minibus that they travel to Germany in. And then pictures at the Indra. One of the things he mentioned from this stage was the clothes, that the Beatles used to wear lilac jackets, black shirts that had a silver stripe on the collar, and he didn't have this. He did have a black shirt, so he used to just generally play with the shirt on. Anyway, so they return, they're at the Casbah, and they get this gig at Little Town Hall on the 27th of December 1960. And Stuart isn't available, he's still in Hamburg, and they recruit Chas Newby from the Blackjacks to fill in on bass. And he had to firstly borrow a bass, and he was left-handed and the bass was right-handed, so he had to play it upside down. So the Beatles had a left-handed bass player. Who would have thought? Anyway, it went down a storm, and they started getting a lot of work in Liverpool, and Pete's mother, Mo, became their de facto promoter. She had a telephone, which was fairly rare, and she was the point of contact. In theory, Alan Williams was supposed to be getting them bookings, but it fell to Mo to get most of them. So he talks about all the gigs in Liverpool, how they played and so on, and the times they had there. Return to Hamburg, then they come back, and then they return again to the Star Club, and that's all in there. Then the meeting with Brian Epstein, he becomes their manager and he changes their image, and everyone's happy with that. You know, afterwards, John expressed resentment many years later that Brian had changed their image from the suit, from the leather jackets and leather pants or jeans into suits. But it was the right thing to do. There's no doubt about that. In my mind, I preferred the way that they'd originally been, the original image, but the way show business worked at the time, there was no way they would have been accepted on the national stage with that look. Anyway, then we come to the fateful meeting where Brian Epstein calls Pete into a meeting and gives him the bad news that the boys don't want him in the band anymore. And it comes right out of the blue. He thought he was just going to be given a list of bookings that were coming up. And apparently, behind the scenes, George Martin had expressed doubts about his playing ability, and he was going to use a session drummer. Now, to put this into perspective, that was very, very common in recording. Drumming, apparently, I don't know much about the drums, but apparently is the crucial thing on a record. Playing live, it doesn't seem to matter so much, but tuning the drums and getting the right sound is crucial, and the session guys can do this at the drop of a hat. Most of the guys in the bands struggle with it a bit, or they did at the time. And of course, when they replaced Pete with Ringo, George said the same. He said, no, we'll use a session player. So he didn't really want to use Ringo either. So, you know, the reason that they'd replaced Pete, had it been solely for George Martin's concerns, what wasn't totally valid under the circumstances. Now, there's all sorts of theories about why he was sacked. This book doesn't really explain them because it's all from his point of view. He's the guy who kind of came right out of the blue. It's explained in two other books very, very well. One by Spencer Lee, which is just devoted to the topic of Pete Best's sacking, which I will review, and also in the major work by Mark Lewison. And they do throw a lot of light on the subject. I remember it. I remember Pete Best being sacked. You know, it went round our school, and it was quite a bombshell because he really was popular. He was a popular member of the band with the fans. So, you know, after that, he ended up with the All Stars, Lee Curtis and so on. But then his career kind of faded. He ended up working in the job centre in Green Lane. And so the book, it has a tragic ending, really, but he didn't really let it affect his life. He had, you know, he had a family, and you know, seems happy, but I mean, who could really deal with that devastating realization that he missed out on what the Beatles were? Because I think he would have been popular on the international stage, just as he was in Liverpool. Now, there is a question about all the records the Beatles made later. Was his drumming up to the standard that they needed when they started experimenting a lot? And that is a question that many drummers are split on, and because Ringo really was the drummer for that phase, but up till then, Pete had done as far as the fans were concerned, a good job. Book is terrific. Pictures, it's all first person with paragraphs put in from Bill Harry, who sets the context around it, and I found it absolutely absorbing, and it's an important part of the story.